I'm here with Governor Mike Braun of Indiana. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here at the GovRAMP Cyber Summit, second annual one.
My pleasure.
You received a nice award, the Founders Award, the second annual Founders Award. So first of all, congratulations to that.
Yeah.
A lot of that comes back to your view of cybersecurity, how you kind of instituted it and really focused on it in Indiana. Just give me a sense of what made you kind of drive cybersecurity harder than maybe we've seen it at the state level and previously.
Number one, I want to thank Joe and Julie Belowski, who we had that introductory meeting not too long ago, and it impressed me while they were talking about technology, cybersecurity, and government. I told them my own story that we're in a trucking company and a warehousing business, which fancy names would be logistics and distribution. Those are some of the lowest profit margin businesses, full bore competition. I finally had to see what I could use as a differentiator. And my older son was interested in technology. He was educated by my younger brother. I was a natural foot dragger because it was expensive. But over those years, from the late 90s, especially the mid-2000s to the present, because my two sons started working in the business in about 2005 or 6, we have used it to be the differentiator that's nearly tripled the bottom line, and we grew the business at between 15 and 20% each year. Could have never done it without technology. We did it on a customizable platform of Great Plains and have fully customized our own operating system and selling system. So I'm a believer. And then when you're really good at it, you want to make sure it's secure, because then in the last decade, constantly, you've got threats to take it down. So then we talk about government, and generally they're behind, they're flatter-footed, they've got just as much at stake, and so it was a natural kind of union of ideas, because all the things most avant-garde are going to be done in the private sector, and the public sector needs to be just as good at being on the leading edge, and generally they're not.
Your experience in the private sector that you brought to Indiana, what did you see when you got to Indiana about the state of the technology, the state of cybersecurity that said, hey, we could make better use and make it more secure? Was there that a moment, or that did someone in your team bring it to you and say, hey, sir, we could use a little push?
So I was surprised how disaggregated it was and disorganized in our state government. That's about 30,000 employees spread across about 60 or 70 agencies. There was no central technology theme. It seemed like everyone was doing their own thing, and the thing I heard most is they didn't like it, it wasn't working, and it was almost outdated, and we were spending a fortune on it. Not to mention the cybersecurity side of it. I guess the only blessing would have been, since it wasn't that great, had it been taken down, it would have been then the real motivation to maybe fix it. So we've been dealing with all that. It's only been 9 months, but we're going to get there, because I'm probably one of just a handful of governors that comes from a not technology background, but we seem like that's a subset of our business, and that gives me a lot of insight in what to do to protect it on the public side. Not to mention the 6 years I was a U.S. Senator and saw all the waste and fraud and issues constantly that cost our federal government a fortune, because they're probably worse than many of the state governments.
I want to touch upon your time as senator, but let's talk about Indiana just a little bit. So you came in, you saw the disaggregated, disorganized, no central IT theme. One of the things you've done in the last 9 months is sign off an executive order around cybersecurity. Right. They mentioned it at the GovRAMP Summit, said, hey, maybe the only state requiring that third-party certification. Talk a little bit about the executive order, and then why did that piece of that provision in it really was so important to you?
It was an executive order because I knew the need for it, and the other option is doing it legislatively. In the big house, the Senate, federal government, that could take nearly a decade. State governments can move more quickly, But a lot of times you get good legislation based upon a good executive order, and you wouldn't get started with it unless you do it. So it was to take, again, all the things that were literally 101 in nature, meaning pretty simple stuff that the private sector would do, because if it happens to us, I mean, you don't have the largesse of public financing to get it back in order. So I just felt it was important. And if we want to be the leading state, not only on technology and how to protect it, that's going to be aimed at education, healthcare, infrastructure, even things like utility rates. We needed to be there, and we weren't. That's why I put it into as high a gear as I could, and that's what that executive order was about.
It's driving speed and flexibility without, okay, the legislation is important, you need it, but if you would have waited, what kind of risk would you face as a state government? What kind of risk would the agencies face in terms of the number of cyber attacks that are happening time and again? That I'm sure also played into that decision.
It did, and even before, like I say, if you have a system that doesn't work very well, cybersecurity impacts probably aren't going to be as great as one that was really working well. Then it's a dereliction that if you're trying to do both, you need to protect it along the way. And I remember as a company how we constantly were spending more money to protect it because we had already perfected it. And what would be worse than to take something you've customized and then have it out there for all the world that tries to take you down, which is sad, but it's the way it works. So that was what drove me to pick up the pace once I got to be the leader of a state. I talked about it when I was a senator, but it oftentimes didn't get beyond a committee hearing.
And so many times when you talk about being a senator, the bills take multiple sessions of Congress to work through and hearings and the build up. So I know there's always a little frustration on something that seems so simple. When you meet with your CISO and your CIO in the state of Indiana, what are the things that they're looking for you to help with? Because I think a lot of times when we talk to folks in that role, it's 3 or 4 levels down. But when you sit in the governor's seat, like there's budget, of course, everyone wants more, right? We know that, but there's a limit. But are there things that you are saying, okay, here's how we can drive that executive leadership to let the other people in the state agencies know that cyber is your job as much as it is the CIO, CISO job?
So when I talk to the CIO of the state, I don't know if there'd be another governor that's woven technology into what they did in the real world career for me 37 years before. So you're coming with a little bit of credibility in terms of what to do. And then it's easy to see how we can get to first base and get a lot done in a short period of time. So they welcome that clarity on what to do. And I don't think you're getting that in many other cases. So that gives us a leg up compared to our other 49 competitors. So they like it that they're not trying to teach the governor or convince him or her of the need for it. I was sold to the extent that I was wanting them to be more aggressive, wanting to find the right players that were going to think outside the box as administrators. A lot of times you don't get that in the public sector. Here, I think we got that.
From you, how do you stay abreast on technology? You can read a lot, you can watch, you can listen, right? But are there certain things that you find, and again, not ask you to name drop any publications or anything like that, of course, but you have a lot going on. You got to understand healthcare, you got to understand technology, you also have to understand people and users, and how do you stay abreast?
So a lot of it would have been the last 10 years of that 37-year stint to where I was making all those decisions. And then it doesn't hurt when your CIO of your company and his brother and little sister run it, and they are all super high tech. So I can see what we do every year, and I still, even though they don't ask me for much advice anymore, we still collaborate on that. So I've got like continuing education through the same company that I ran in all of it is going to be applicable to government. It's just, will government put the resources to it when they generally got more of it that they could put to it, because maybe they fear it, just like many companies do.
Yep.
Being at the apex of your operating system and your selling system, and especially how to protect it, that's kind of where I stay so abreast of it.
And I think you bring up a really interesting point. Governors and leaders, just generally, companies or in the federal world or in the private sector, if they don't have that recognition of the importance of cybersecurity and IT and driving technology change, automation, now we're going to talk about AI all day, I'm sure, then it doesn't kind of trickle down to the others to understand, okay, if my boss finds that this is important, I have to think it's important. How do you communicate that to other people in the state of Indiana beyond?
So I hate to keep bringing it back to when I ran my business, I paid attention to details and had to craft the strategy. As you get larger, details have to be delegated. But if you ever are only floating in the ether, so to speak, and you've lost track of some of the things you need to know more in a granular way, so that culture is still intact in the business. I'm trying to integrate that into, in most governments, you got to have the agency interested in it. You can't imagine how long that might take. Then it's got to go to your chief of staff. I've invited anyone rank and file to just come to me, and that's not going to work in terms of scaling it, but it sets a culture that I want to get good ideas from the bottom up, and I put people in the top positions telling them create that atmosphere. So we're getting all of that now in the culture of our own government. It's only been 9 months. See big returns already.
Yeah, the changing the culture piece is when it comes to technology, cyber, whatever, it's always about getting the people to buy in and understand the benefits. And that's always the hardest.
Folks in government are a little risk averse, where competition makes you somewhat more of a risk taker in the real world. So you got to apply it accordingly.
And if you have the leadership that it's okay to take some risks, smart risks, then you get empowered to do that. But if you have a leader who is, let's be smart, let's really kind of more calculated, than that causes. In the last few minutes we have together, I just want to touch upon your time as senator. One of the things that when I did a little bit of research, you were a big proponent of e-signatures, and specifically around Social Security Administration. How did that influence both your time now in Indiana governor, and what drove that desire when you were on Capitol Hill?
Well, that was a frustrating navigation because of the lumbering nature of the federal government. I can see already how much difference in the dynamic there is, but I still thought it was worthwhile. When you're talking about in Medicare, $60 billion worth of fraud, so much fraud penetrates our federal government, through the whole CARES Act, the $4 trillion we dumped into having to respond to that healthcare crisis. I don't want to depress the audience about how much of that dissipated into who knows where. So I knew the need was there for it. When you have the GAO, you have the Inspector General saying the same thing, there weren't many senators that knew what to talk about or what to look for. That was, again, my cup of tea, and for the short time I was there, I think it did make a difference. It also helped me on the real issues themselves, being on health, education, labor, and pension, or the agriculture committee. I was involved in all those arenas in the real world of building a business. If you weren't, you know who fed you the information? A 25-year-old staffer that just Googled it. So I didn't have to use notes through most of that. Yeah. And then I understood, stick your neck out. If you kind of know what you're talking about, it's worth at least expressing your opinion, and you hope that some of it sticks. Sooner or later, that place will have to fix itself so it doesn't spend more than it takes in. And most places don't have the benefit of a printing press in the basement. And when you're not being forward-looking to technology, when that's generally the differentiator in almost any field, a lot of things have got to get better, and the good news is there's a lot of room for improvement. So I thought it was worthwhile to use my pulpit, my committee to the extent I could.
And I think there's a lot of connection back to what we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes or so, which is around using your position, your pulpit, your knowledge to really drive down change and really push for change. You mentioned 9 months in as Indiana governor. If we talk again in 9 months or a year from now, what do you hope to see as the major change areas around technology, cyber, and just, if you will, process improvement?
So in life, the things you can confront generally are things out of your control that can eat up all the oxygen in the room. First campaigning and first session was property taxes. And then I guess I'm the lucky governor that now high utility rates come into play. Those are kitchen table issues that you got to get through. And so often you'll be dealing with them because that's the rubber meets the road with states in terms of crafting policies that people have to live with every day. So then will you get diverted from doing the things that will make the state just run better? Again, I was always busy running a business. There was never a day when I said, darn, I've got time to spare. You kind of do the same thing here, but the blessing of knowing how to run with competition and where it's much harder in the real world, we'll get through all that. So we're going to get to be, hopefully, the leading edge state on using technology and then protecting it. And then the good thing about the 50 states, we share it with the other 49. And maybe there needs to be a little more emphasis on the 50 laboratories that live within their means to give them a little more responsibility than the place that has all the benefits and has trouble knocking much out of the park. So we'll see.
All right. Appreciate your time today at the GovRAMP Cyber Summit. A lot more to talk about, but I will thank my guest. Mike Braun is the governor of Indiana. Mike, thank you so much for
my pleasure.